This just in, President Biden announced an agreement to allow humanitarian aid to move from Egypt to Gaza and confirmed $100 million in U.S. funding for assistance to civilians in Gaza and also the West Bank, according to The Hill. While speaking in Tel Aviv as part of a trip to Israel in the wake of terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas, Biden said he asked the Israeli cabinet during a meeting to agree to the delivery of humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, quote, based on understanding that there will be inspections and aid should go to civilians, not to Hamas. Let's watch some of that.
The people of Gaza need food, water, medicine, shelter. Today I asked the Israeli cabinet, who I met with for some time this morning, to agree to the delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, based on the understanding that there will be inspections and that the aid should go to civilians, not to Hamas. Israel agreed the humanitarian assistance can begin to move from Egypt to Gaza. But let me be clear, if Hamas diverts or steals the assistance, they will have demonstrated once again that they have no concern for the welfare of the Palestinian people. And it will end. As a practical matter, it will stop the international community from being able to provide this aid.
Meanwhile, a senior Hamas leader has told NBC News that the group is willing to release all civilian hostages, foreigners and Israelis, if the strikes on Gaza stop. Israeli forces say some 200 people were kidnapped and are currently being held by Hamas as part of last week's terror attacks. This is all happening as anti-Israel protests are erupting in Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, Iran, Turkey, and in Ramallah in the West Bank, following the blast at al-Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza that killed hundreds of people. Obviously, there's been a lot of new news about what the extent of the damage was there, and obviously who perpetrated that attack as well, that we covered in another segment. You should go check that out in more detail.
Yeah, and the Wall Street Journal has subsequent reporting. I just read through their post on the U.S. intelligence officials now being quite certain, having high confidence that the blast at the hospital was from not the Hamas group, but the other Palestinian terror group. There's a lot of skepticism in this Wall Street Journal report that hundreds of people would have suffered death as a result of this specific explosion. We don't know. That figure comes only from the Gaza Health Ministry, so it's just totally unconfirmed either way. But the Wall Street Journal report makes it sound like primarily the explosion was the parking lot and that there was not major structural damage to the surrounding buildings. That's just one report. Again, we don't know yet. We're waiting for more information.
So I'd love to talk about this story about the humanitarian aid, because up until this point, the sticking point with humanitarian aid, remember Anthony Blinken was in this 7.5-hour meeting earlier this week where the conclusion was there should be aid, but the problem, one of the large problems has been that Israel has bombed the Rafah Gate, which is the gate to Egypt through which the aid is supposed to come. And there's low confidence that people who are using those thoroughfares are going to actually be safe. At the same time that this is all happening, just now this morning, the UN voted on a Security Council resolution to call for a ceasefire, which was vetoed by the United States of America. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this could have been vetoed, including that there were some Russian amendments that were calling for an immediate, durable, and full ceasefire and to stop attacks against civilians. And there has been a pattern of vetoing or rejecting resolutions when Russia is involved. But the explicit reason that U.S. Ambassador Lindsey Thomas Greenfield raised was that, quote, this resolution did not mention Israel's right of self-defense. So no ceasefire. At the same time that we're saying we're going to have an allowance for humanitarian aid, the UN, because of America's veto, is giving us a somewhat different message. And I do wonder how that's all going to play out, since we do have now a history over the past 10 days or so of Israel saying people can evacuate along a certain route and then bombing it, saying that people should go to southern Gaza to be safe. There was reporting of bombing there last night, IDF bombing last night, and then also this controversy around the Rafah Gate.
In terms of the offer to release the hostages if bombing were to cease, I think obviously in a vacuum that would be terrific. That's the aim we want. We don't want Palestinian civilians to be suffering death as a result of these bombings. We want the hostages to be released. Unfortunately, there's many problems with this. One being that Hamas is not even in possession of all the hostages right now, is what I'm reading. It's being reported that some of them were grabbed opportunistically by Palestinians who are not directly officially under the Hamas leadership chain. Hamas is apparently still trying to figure out exactly where each and all of the hostages are being kept, at the same time that obviously from the organization standpoint, they're trying to stop themselves from being blown apart by Israel airstrikes. So the idea that they could just release all the hostages at once is probably not true anyway. Also, frankly, they're not going to. I think Hamas would not believe that the airstrikes on Gaza would not simply resume after the hostages were released. So they're probably unlikely to follow through on that anyway, due to a lack of trust in the Israeli side. There's a lack of trust in both directions.
Robby, you're just describing the nature of any kind of hostage situation or handoff. Give me the bag of money, and I'll give you the person. I mean, at any point, the risk is always that someone's going to renege on their side of the deal. That's not anything unique to this particular situation.
But
the reality is that Hamas has apparently offered to release hostages in their possession if there is a ceasefire. There is a ceasefire.
Well, they said all the hostages. They don't even have all the hostages, so.
Yeah, I just said all the hostages in their possession. Didn't I?
I think they said all of the hostages.
Right, but I just said all the hostages in their possession. So even if they don't have all the hostages, if they had 2 hostages, I'm sure that's 2 families that would be very interested in what it would mean to try to negotiate around getting their loved ones back if there's some kind of a ceasefire, even if it's temporary in nature. And given that there are simultaneously humanitarian calls for a ceasefire, including in the UN Security Council, it does seem like there's an alliance of interest where maybe Israel will be doing this anyway because it has rained retribution down on Gaza. It has killed twice as many people as were killed on October 7th. One might anticipate that at a certain point this has to end or should end, that an eye for an eye, it's been an eye for, 2 eyes for an eye. And that if you can also, on top of that, get back all of these hostages who I'm sure are terrified, injured, living in a situation where there's not water, limited food resources, no medical supplies that have been able to get into Gaza. And they were working with very limited medical supplies even before October 7th because of the blockades. They want to get their family members out there. Every day that goes by could be a day that a hostage dies, not because they were even killed, but because they were injured in the capture and aren't getting medical attention.
Well, in fact, we've seen videos. The one hostage video that was released, the woman, she was in horrible shape. She was a grievous arm injury.
Do you think they're having pain meds for her?
Yeah,
do you think that, it's
torture?
So I really do hope the American government is taking it seriously, but I will say that vetoing this UN Security Council to have a ceasefire does suggest to me that that is in some ways off the table, at least in the form that it was presented to the UN.
Yes, they should. Both government, the U.S. and Israeli government, should prioritize having the hostages freed, rescued, or released by whatever means. And the goal should be to bring an end to this bombing that is creating tons of civilian casualties on the Palestinian side, which will, again, breed further conflict down the line. There will be a rallying around the terrorist Islamic extremists due to the Palestinian lives that are being lost. So it's just going to get itself it's already in a retaliatory cycle, but it will. At some point, someone needs to come to some arrangement. Both sides need to come to an arrangement and stand down so that we can preserve innocent human life moving forward.
It's also, I'm sorry, it's not like the Palestinians are going anywhere. The thing about an open air prison in a walled community is that the second that Israel, if it changed its mind, if it felt like a deal had been reneged upon, that there's nothing stopping it from endlessly bombing people of Gaza. Gazans have been bombed throughout for years, routinely, multiple times, periodically over the course of the year, even before this crisis. So it does feel like there's a lot of upside here for Israel and very little downside. So I don't know. We'll continue to follow this and see how it plays out. Please do stick around. We have a lot more Rising for you after this.